From the very dawn of humanity, we have looked up and seen birds. Not one of us, not even when we were tiny stem primates scurrying beneath the feet or climbing across branches over the heads of dinosaurs, has lived a life without birdsong. They appear in our earliest cave paintings. We view them as messengers or incarnations of gods, Odin's ravens, Athena's little owl, even the dove of Abrahamic religions. We see them as figures of strength and wisdom. We call ourselves hawk-eyed when our eyes are keen. We crow when we laugh. We are the early bird that got the worm when being prompt is rewarded. We rely on birds more than we know. Our ancestors relied on pigeons for meat, eggs, communication and companionship. Before agriculture, many of them worked with wild raptors to hunt in the beginnings of falconry. Today, many of us eat chicken as our staple meat and use their eggs just as much. Our coats and duvets are full of down feathers, and we keep them as pets for our own entertainment. But what are birds? Some of you may have heard that birds are robot government drones. Well, that's not the most outlandish bird origin theory. The truth is much, much worse. What I'm about to tell you is known as fact to most of the scientific community, yet has not seemed to have widely breached containment when it comes to the public. Let me rectify that. Birds are dinosaurs. I'm not winding you up or pulling a joke. I'm being 100% deadly serious. Birds are true dinosaurs in every single way, and they survived the mass extinction that wiped out their cousins. There are over 9,000 species of living dinosaur on our planet today, and that's incredible. How do we know this, though? And if it's such common knowledge in the scientific community, then why is it so startling to everyone else? Well, that's just one of the things we're going to be covering today. I'll be telling you about birds, their connections and relationships with the other dinosaurs, how they're unique from their relatives, and what we can learn about the extinct dinosaurs from their incredible living relatives. The beginning of our official understanding of dinosaurs began in 1824 with the naming of Megalosaurus, Iguanodon and Hylaeosaurus by Sir Richard Owen. He coined the word Dinosauria, meaning terrible reptile, terrible in the sense of inspiring terror rather than being terrible. He decided that these animals must have belonged to a class of animal unlike anything alive today, and that dinosaurs no longer existed. He was wrong. We know much more about dinosaurs now than they could have even imagined back then. You must understand, this was a time when evolution was a fiercely debated theory, not the generally well-accepted truth we have today. Richard Owen coined the word dinosaur decades before On the Origin of Species was published. Science back then was the study of what was there, viewed as eternal and unchanging. We had no idea of how long history was and how many forms life had taken to reach us. In 1735, Carl Linnaeus published the first edition of Systema Naturae. This is considered the root of taxonomy, and Linnaeus its father. Many of the scientific names animals still have today were given to them by him. He separated much of the living world into groups depending on shared characteristics, assuming them to have descended from a common ancestor. Mammals were warm-blooded, gave live birth, and produced milk for their children, except the platypus and echidna who still lay eggs, but that's okay. Reptiles were cold-blooded, laid eggs and did not lactate, except that the Argentine black and white tegu and female pythons incubating eggs can also be endothermic, at least temporarily, and a large percentage of reptiles give live birth. But that's okay. Birds were entirely in their own category, but just by looking at their features, they seem like a strange in-between between mammals and reptiles. They're warm-blooded, like mammals, and lay eggs, like reptiles. They have insulating feathers and sharp, toothless beaks. Many, but not all of them, fly. When Linnaeus broke the natural world into groups and lists, the word dinosaur didn't exist yet. He was working with what he had, and he gave us the framework for our entire understanding of the natural world. But he was still working from incomplete knowledge. Our first brief glimpse into birds' pasts came in 1861 when we discovered Archaeopteryx, one of the oldest birds that we know of. It was the first time feathers had been preserved in a fossil, and it had come just 2 years after Charles Darwin had published On the Origin of Species. It was, and still is, one of the most important fossils ever discovered. It had clear feathering, but it also had a mouth full of teeth and a long, bony tail. So why did it take so long for us to realise that birds were dinosaurs if we had such a clear and perfect fossil? Well, it didn't take everyone long. Biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog, thought long and hard that birds were descendants of dinosaurs. He pointed out similarities between Archaeopteryx and dinosaurs like Compsognathus, small dinosaurs that we now call theropods. Indeed, birds do belong to this group, and they share many, many similar anatomical traits. But the view on dinosaurs was that they were reptiles, slow and sluggish, cold-blooded. They were enormous crocodiles or iguanas, nothing like the active, vibrant birds that everyone knew so well. I feel that this is still part of the reason that there is such a pushback on birds being dinosaurs today. Dinosaurs are seen as scaly, preying on humanity's fear of reptiles thanks to our ancestors' long and storied altercations with venomous snakes. Reptiles, and ectotherms in general, are looked down on by us, and have been for a long time. Humanity centres itself at every opportunity. This opinion of dinosaurs only got worse as time went on, not helped by the Great Depression and the aftermath of 2 world wars. If dinosaurs were so great, why did they go extinct? The pervasive answer seemed to be because they were a failure. They were giant, dumb lizards, doomed to die by their own design. Evolution had experimented and failed. Of course, we didn't know then that dinosaurs had lived on this earth longer than we had existed. We also didn't know that some of them had never died out in the first place. The connection between birds and dinosaurs was put down then by one Gerhard Heilmann. He was an artist with a scholarly interest in birds. He too compared Archaeopteryx and other birds to extinct reptiles and saw what Huxley did, a close similarity to Compsognathus and other theropod dinosaurs. But Heilmann subscribed to an interpretation of something called Doller's law that stated that something could not be reversed in evolution. Birds' clavicles fused together to form a bone called a furcula, also called a wishbone. Clavicles have been found in more basal reptiles, but none had yet been found in dinosaurs. Because of this, and despite all the evidence that he had found to the contrary, Heilmann came to the conclusion that birds could not be descended from dinosaurs and that their similarities were convergent. He theorized that birds evolved from a separate class of reptiles, which he called thecodonts. His approach was so thorough that when he published his book on the topic, The Origin of Birds, it was accepted and taken as fact by almost all evolutionary biologists for the next 40 years. Let me debunk this now. We know now that things can reverse or re-evolve now. Some evolutions are as simple as a particular gene being switched on or off, and clavicles are delicate and often don't survive the fossilization process. Actually, some clavicles of dinosaurs had been excavated before Heilmann wrote The Origin of Birds, but they had been misidentified. We now know that dinosaurs did indeed have them, not just clavicles but furculae, in not just the theropods but in all Saurischian dinosaurs, that group that includes them and the sauropods. So, Heilmann was wrong. But how did we find that out? We have one man to thank for this, John Ostrom. In 1964, he discovered a new theropod dinosaur in Montana. In 1969, he named it Deinonychus anterophus, meaning terrible claw for its large hooked claws on its feet and counterbalancing for its long tail. Looking at the bones of this animal, there was no way it was a slow, sluggish, lizard-like creature. It was fast, agile, and it changed how people looked at dinosaurs forever. Just a year later, Ostrom was visiting the Dutch Tailors Museum, where he realised that a specimen of Pterodactylus was in fact a bird. This made him realise the similarities between the forelimbs of Archaeopteryx and Deinonychus, and therefore dinosaurs and birds. He originally thought that it was an Archaeopteryx, but the fossil was later reassigned to its own genus, named after Ostrom. When British paleontologist Alec Walker hypothesised that birds were descendants of crocodilians, he gave Ostrom the opportunity to drop a series of publications across the mid-1970s where he laid out everything he had learned about birds and their similarities to theropod dinosaurs, bringing back Huxley's century-old theories. Ostrom's work on dinosaurs, Birds' ancestry and Deinonychus kick-started what is now known as the dinosaur renaissance, which is technically still going today. New discoveries and ideas about dinosaur metabolism, their activity and parental care shaped this, and brought us much of what we now consider common knowledge today. At the same time, science was adopting a new kind of taxonomy, cladistics. Cladistics is when organisms are classified not in shared traits, but in shared common ancestry. Each group is called a clade, and until recently, they were hypotheses. When it comes to paleontology, most of cladistics is still hypotheses. But when it comes to living animals, we have recently been able to look at and compare animals' DNA in order to understand who is related to who. In 1986, Jacques Gautier, one of the founders of the use of cladistics in biology, applied it to dinosaur phylogeny for the first time, showing that birds were a derived group of theropod dinosaurs closely related to the dromaeosaurs like Deinonychus and Velociraptor, as well as the troodontids. Many others followed in his footsteps and found the same. More and more of the scientific community began to agree that birds were not just related to or descended from, but were true dinosaurs themselves. And then Sinosauropteryx was found. The incredible preservation of the geologic formations in the northeastern Chinese province of Liaoning began revealing extremely well-preserved fossils of fully feathered dinosaurs. Sinosauropteryx was covered in a coat of long, filamentous structures that the scientists dubbed protofeathers, and was probably similar to the down on newborn chicks. Sinosauropteryx was the first non-avian dinosaur to be found with feathers, and many more were soon discovered. We have since discovered a range of fossils with feathers, from the enormous tyrannosaurid Eutyrannus to the completely unrelated ornithischian dinosaur Culindrodromaeus, the last common ancestor of both birds, and Culindrodromaeus was most likely the last common ancestor of all of Dinosauria. So why don't we find T-Rex with feathers? Why are there no sauropods or other large dinosaurs with them? Well, for one, we don't know that they didn't have them for certain. Finds like Eutyrannus make that clear. Feathers don't fossilize outside of incredibly specific circumstances, and larger animals are less likely to be fully preserved anyway. Also, it is possible that they lost their feathers as they grew larger. Feathers probably first evolved in the common ancestor of all of Dinosauria for the same reason that mammals evolved fur: heat retention. You see, it's likely that all of Dinosauria was at least a little bit endothermic, which was the trick that allowed them to come roaring into the Jurassic following a global cooling at the end of the Triassic. A large theropod like Tyrannosaurus rex or any of the huge sauropods living in a warm environment would not have needed a coat of feathers, though Tyrannosaurus was probably covered in a kind of peach fuzz. Its juveniles might have had a feathery coat that was lost with age. Eutyrannus lived in an environment that was extremely cold in winter. It's likely that it needed its feathery coat in order to survive. Feathers got progressively more and more complicated as they were repurposed for use in display, for balance, for communication and for hunting. And, eventually, in a group of small Maniraptorans in the Jurassic, flight. We don't know how birds began to fly exactly, just that once they did, they mostly didn't stop. There's a lot more birds have in common with dinosaurs. Nest building, hollow bones, the way they breathe, swallowing gastroliths to aid in digestion. The list goes on. It gets to a point where we have realised that birds are dinosaurs. But there's one thing that people always wonder about. One simple thing that many dinosaurs have, that Archaeopteryx has, and birds do not. Today, all birds alive have beaks and no true teeth. In the Cretaceous, this wasn't true. A group of small flighted avialans evolved, the Enantiornithes. Enantiornithes means opposite birds, and they're not in the clade Euornithes, the so-called true birds, that also existed at the same time and contains today's birds and their closest relatives. They were called opposite birds because their shoulder setup was the complete opposite of modern birds. This does give the wrong impression though. They were birds, almost indistinguishable from their relatives from afar, but look closer and you'd see that their tails were different and most had mouths filled with tiny sharp teeth. A few were fully toothless and beaked, but the vast majority were not. They were small overall, the largest found being around the size of a modern turkey, but larger species may have existed. But none of them exist anymore. All of them went extinct when the KPG extinction event took them and the rest of the non-avian dinosaurs off the planet. But why did only small, flying, beaked dinosaurs survive? Why were the avies the only ones to make it to the modern day? We don't know for sure, but the leading hypothesis goes like this. At the end of the Cretaceous, a 6-mile-wide asteroid hit the Gulf of Mexico. For a while before this, volcanic activity had become common on Earth. The asteroid hit one of the most volcanic parts of the Earth at the time. The combination of this meant that dust, debris, and the remains of the explosion were blown into the air, covering the sun and igniting the forests that many of the toothed birds called home. There was also toxic gases and acid rain across the globe. With the sun blocked out, plants were unable to photosynthesize. Our ancestors survived by burying themselves in the ground and finding food there. The ancestors of all living crocodilians survived thanks to their metabolisms, allowing them to go years without food. And the ancestors of living birds were probably small, quail and rail-like creatures, flighted but ground-dwelling, who had lost their teeth and evolved beaks in order to forage for seeds and insects on the forest floor or along the water's edge, find the only food sources left to them. With all the plants gone, the herbivores starved, and when all the herbivores died and all of their carcasses had been scavenged, the carnivores followed them. The destruction and death of the forests that the Enantiornithes called home meant that their habitats, their food sources, and everything they relied on disappeared. 3 lineages of birds survived, just 3, and it is from them that all birds alive today are descended. They are the Paleognathi, the basal group of avians that includes all the ratites and tinamou, the Pangaloancerae, which includes all the fowl and waterfowl, and everything else, the Neo-Aves. The Neo-Aves are by far the largest group, making up almost 95% of all species of birds alive. All 3 of these groups were fully separate and developed by the time the asteroid hit. All 3 of these groups have beaks and no teeth because no toothed birds were able to survive the KPG extinction event. Because of that, we perceive birds as beaked animals, when in truth that hasn't always been the case. It's simply the fact that the only birds, and indeed dinosaurs, alive today have them. Following the mass extinction, birds went absolutely wild. They began to evolve so fast that it's actually very hard for scientists to pinpoint the evolutionary relationships between them, even when looking at their DNA. It's likely that only a few tiny populations of birds survived at all. The small seed-eating ancestors of the avians might have been humble creatures, but they were the ancestors of eagles, kingfishers, parrots, corvids, and every bird you can think of today. In truth, while beaks were not entirely common in many of the Enantiornithes, the avians were not the first time it had appeared in birds. Toothlessness is a trait that many dinosaurs, both birds and not, have evolved convergently over time. It's not even unique to dinosaurs. Look at turtles, another unrelated group of reptiles. We see it again and again in the fossil record. We think of beaks, feathers, nest building, and even flight as bird-like traits, but all of these were present in their non-avian relatives. So what makes a bird a bird? Ask many scientists this, and they'll tell you its ancestry. But I have another theory, one that might ruffle some feathers. If the non-avian dinosaurs had never gone extinct, if they had lived alongside our modern birds today, it would be likely that we would also call them birds. Looking at reconstructions of dromaeosaurs, of oviraptors and others too, they just look like extremely large flightless birds. Bird is a word we came up with to describe theropod dinosaurs before we knew what dinosaurs are. It has meaning related to experience with these animals, and now we have discovered their ancestors, unpacked their long, rich and complicated evolutionary history, and I haven't even covered a fraction of it, believe me. What conclusion can we come to? Bird is a word that our ancestors came up with to describe all living dinosaurs before they knew what a dinosaur was, before they knew that the ground they walked on had once been touched by the feet of ancient, complicated reptiles with warm bodies and feathers. So birds are a meeting of two worlds. They represent the ancient past that their direct ancestors ruled, and the mystical otherness that so many of our direct ancestors saw that caused them to worship birds as incarnations of gods. We are so lucky that any dinosaurs survived that mass extinction that took most of them off this planet. We are lucky that they died too, for it's likely if they hadn't, then we would still be small and shrew-like, scurrying beneath the feet of whatever brilliant form evolution had shaped the dinosaurs into next. But evolution has not been idle with birds. Dinosaurs have not ceased to exist. They are still here, and though many of them have returned to their grounded roots, most of them rule the skies, their wings a marvel of nature's engineering. Insects were the first animals to fly, and pterosaurs followed later. Bats, the only mammals with powered flight, save technically humans, were only able to evolve in the absence of the non-avian dinosaurs and their pterosaur cousins. Everyone has had some kind of interaction with birds, one way or another. They are everywhere, in our culture, our language, our cities and farms and landfills. To me, birds are the pinnacle of our world, proof of life's resilience, beauty, innovation and exploration. They were not the first or the last to develop powered flight, and yet it is birds we think of when we consider the word wing. And most people have no idea that dinosaurs still live, and that they're alongside us every day. Pigeons are dinosaurs we domesticated and abandoned and now live in our cities. Penguins are polar dinosaurs, and semi-aquatic ones too. Crows, parrots and caracara are incredibly intelligent dinosaurs, on the same level as chimps and human children. Songbirds have language. Many birds use tools, create art, perform fiercely choreographed rituals in order to impress a mate, fly thousands of miles without a map or sat-nav on nothing but instinct and pure navigational skill. We envied them, ate them, were eaten by them, made friends and enemies of them. Our saga continues the endless back and forth of mammal versus dinosaur, synapsid versus sauropsid. The balance is in our favour for now, but with how things are going, it would not surprise me if it swung back sooner rather than later. Thank you for watching. If you're still watching this, I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoyed my first attempt at a YouTube video. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments. I have lots more content planned, mostly about birds, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Until then, keep your eyes on the skies, make sure to feed your friendly garden dinosaurs, and I'll see you soon.